Hi there, and welcome to CBTS Tech Talk. I'm the show's producer, Lance Hart, and today I am joined by CBTS expert John Bruggeman, consulting CISO, and a special in-studio guest, Joe Davis, cyber practice leader at Houchens Insurance Group. Guys, thanks for joining us, and John, let's jump right in.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lance. Joe, welcome to Cincinnati. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You and I have talked for the last 30 minutes about cyber insurance, so I'm sure we're going to have no problems talking for the next 7 hours about cyber insurance. But we don't have that much time. We'll hit basically 4 questions for folks, and the biggest one is, what do they have to do to buy cyber insurance? You know, what are the requirements for folks, companies, organizations that want to buy cyber insurance? We do know that the insurance landscape has changed and there are certain criteria. But as you're talking with your customers, what are the main things that you're expecting them to have in place?
Sure. So if we're talking about the main things that we're looking to have in place, just to kind of get the conversation started from a insurance perspective, is making sure that you have multi-factor authentication. It's become the hot topic of this year. You've probably, your companies have already been hearing about it. They should, may or may not understand what it exactly is, but they do need to understand that it's very, very important.
Yes.
Multi-factor authentication is the buzzword, and that's
and it's getting easier to implement, I will say.
It is.
For a lot of companies that have gone to a cloud service offering for email, like either Google or Microsoft Office, those two companies have the multi-factor authentication built in. It's typically a switch that somebody on the IT side of the house has to throw. There's certainly training and awareness that has to happen for that. But we know there's other things. VPN access has to be covered, so you want to be able to put MFA, multi-factor authentication, in front of that. And then there are other criteria too that you want to look at in terms of air gapping your backup.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about either of those?
Yes, air gap backups, but to go back to MFA, we're also wanting to see that from an insurance perspective on the admin access as well. So non-forward facing controls we're looking to see MFA on that as well, and that's just basics of kind of having that first conversation between multi-factor authentication, backups that are air gapped. And traditional air gapping would be physical removal, but what we're really talking about is basically off network, segregated backups, and MFA'd into as well to be able to get to those backups is really the second criteria that insurance companies are really wanting to see in place to have or to just begin the conversation to implement those controls to be able to buy insurance. The other is a endpoint detection and response solution that's monitored 24/7.
The monitoring 24/7 is the hard part. I mean, I recognize, and pretty much in my experience, the last 12 months, I haven't talked to anybody that doesn't have a good endpoint detection solution, which covers Microsoft Defender is fine. A lot of insurance carriers will accept Microsoft Defender, which you can get with your Microsoft's subscription. There's lots of other solutions out there, CrowdStrike, Trend Micro, you name it. There's a number of vendors out there. And the monitoring 24/7 is the hard part. Have you, in your experience, has that been a stumbling block for companies to get, coverage to say that it's not monitored 24/7?
Not as much that it's not monitored 24/7, because I think that sometimes the monitoring 24/7 can be a little bit misconstrued. Some of those programs that you're talking about, they are 24/7. They're actually being able to diagnose that. They're able to put that, see what's happening within that EDR solution, and they're just wanting to make sure that if something were to pop up, that you have somebody on staff, somebody that's got some sort of a notification that they can go ahead and get that, get that taken care of quickly, without, having to come in, and then the next thing you know, it's been 24 hours, but that has actually, triggered, 24 hours ago. So the monitoring aspect of it is sometimes built within the system. It's just making sure that you have somebody that is monitoring that system, throughout the day, whether that's a notification or what that would be.
Okay. And then in terms of the air gapping, sometimes people, if they're a smaller organization and maybe they're using a lot of cloud services, they might have an air gap backup solution. They just don't know it. But putting multi-factor authentication in front of your online backups, whether it's Carbonite or, you could use Dropbox or OneDrive or, pick your favorite cloud storage solution, putting MFA in front of that is something that a lot of people probably aren't thinking about doing at this point in time.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where we've kind of, multi-factor is becoming everywhere. They want to see multi-factor on anything that we can put multi-factor on.
Correct.
And the backups, from a perspective of the insurance company, they're wanting to make sure that you can go to get to those backups. And if those are corrupted, then it's a whole nother insuring agreement. You've got more that has to go on when you're trying to get the company back up and running. That's getting involved with that. So having that MFA is just that secondary layer, that risk management aspect of things to make sure that it's more and more difficult to be able to get to any of those backup solutions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I tell folks that I talk to, that we call it the hunter's dilemma. You don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than the person with you. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make yourself less attractive to the threat actors out there.
Yes and no. So I would say that you're definitely trying to reduce your risk.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it can still happen. There's a human element that's going to be involved in everything. There's time frames where we're looking at patching that might be down. You might have to disable MFA for some reason to upgrade. There's lots of things that could happen within the process of that. So it's really more of when it does happen, because it's not if, it's when. And we've everybody's gone through that, probably heard that saying when it comes to cyber.
Yes.
It's going to probably happen, but is it going to happen and it's going to become a $1 million, a $2 million claim because it's been able to get into all these different places?
Can you minimize
Or can you minimize that risk and contain it? And that's where, from an insurance perspective and the underwriting perspective on this, they're looking to minimize that risk. And these are the tools that they've found to help identify that quickly so that you're not looking at these large claims that we keep seeing about. I mean, $1 million, $2 million, I mean, these huge claims up to $40 million. I mean, they're happening all the time.
Yeah.
And from an insurance perspective, what they're really wanting to do is make sure that when this does happen, they can keep that a containable number so they're not looking at these huge, unbelievable claims.
Right, because the insurance companies have to stay in business too. I mean, they can't keep sustaining the losses that they've experienced. And one other thing that you had told me before that insurance companies want to make sure is mitigated to some degree is software that might be end of life. You might have that, God forbid, Windows 2000 server sitting there running some application that hopefully is not critical to your business environment. But is that something that you see a lot of, that there are legacy applications out there that maybe you do a carve out for it? So, all right, we've got a policy that will protect the vast majority of a company's business. And then there's a carve out that says, for this legacy piece of software, we're going to move that to another policy, or maybe just not cover it. Is that
a little bit? Not necessarily another policy, but if you have end-of-life software or something that's out there, there may be co-insurances that would be involved with that,
right,
and a time frame for you to basically get rid of that, to update.
So you might have a 1-year policy that covers everything, and then there's a co-insurance on this legacy piece of software.
This legacy piece of software, you could have a 20% co-insurance after the first 30 days. Then after 60 days, it could go up to 40%. Then it could go up to 50%. So they give you a time frame to be able to kind of update that software, knowing that it might take a little bit of time to do that. But having a plan in place and knowing that that's an issue, and really understanding that this is something that we need to take place is really the main issue there, is making sure that you're getting off of those legacy programs.
Yes.
But the insurance company is looking at it like, if we're still using things that they're not building updates for, we're not able to patch
there are no
these
patches.
from their perspective, how can they ensure that? And for them to even offer the co-insurance and to do what they're doing on that, you're still getting coverage for it. So I think that they've done a great job of being able to understand that that is an issue that companies are kind of coming up against, and really partnering, if you think about it, with them so that they can get to the point that co-insurance is not an issue.
Gotcha. Okay. So a couple real quick takeaways for everybody in terms of buying insurance. You have to be prepared to have multi-factor authentication for all of your users. Primarily, email is the biggest threat that the non-administrative users For administrative users or administrative access, you have to have multi-factor authentication for sure on that. And that would be even on-prem. So like if you've got a domain controller or some application where there's an administrative user, you still want multi-factor authentication on that. Then one of the other takeaways that we've got is the privileged accounts. So your domain admin credentials, things like that, where the domain or the power user, if you will, the root user would have to have multi-factor authentication turned on. We also have the offline air-gapped backups. So that would be something else that people would want to be able to do. And we can put these in the dialogue window of this video, so that way it's easy for people to figure out what the things are that you need to have in place to buy the cyber insurance. So let's talk about our next topic.
And just before we get into
sure.
that, you were to buy the insurance. That's to buy a full-blown policy, to have those in place. So if you don't have some of that stuff in place, you're limiting yourself in the marketplace. So whereas you might have 20 companies that would be interested in quoting this, if you did have those in place, you may have 2 that would give you options because you don't have those in place. And the policy would not look the same way as if you did. So you would have co-insurances like what we were talking about, or sub-limits. So if you had a $1 million policy, well, ransomware, which is one of the largest drivers of where we've kind of come in this cyber insurance environment now, might only be $100,000 or $250,000 for that. You're still getting other insuring agreements with that, but they're limiting, the insurance company wants to limit their impact too because those controls aren't in place. So the odds of you having a claim are higher.
Right.
So you can still look at a policy and you might still be able to have options with the policy. It's just that it won't look like a full-blown policy. Now you would then try to put those controls in place, and once those controls are in place, you could have conversations about increasing those limits up to the full limits on there. So
could that happen in a whole year? So let's say that in my previous policy, I had $1 million cyber insurance ransomware limit. So the insurance company would cover $1 million of ransomware extortion, if you will. I get my new policy and it's only $100,000 because I don't have multi-factor turned on or I don't have air-gapped backups. 6 months in, I've made it a priority. I've invested in it. Now I've got air-gapped backups and I've got multi-factor authentication turned on. Can I go back to the insurance company and say, hey, can you change that limit?
it's carrier specific on that.
Okay.
So you would want to have that conversation with your insurance agent beforehand and make sure that the option that you do go with at your renewal, you do have the option to later on in that policy period, if you're able to put those things in place, that you could go back to that carrier and they would entertain increasing those limits. So it's really an upfront conversation because at the end of the day...
So you could write the policy. If you talk to your insurance broker beforehand and say, look, I'm going to do these things. I know I don't have them in place now. Write it into the policy. And then you execute that policy that says, when these controls are in place, we're going to revisit the question of limits.
Yes, you can, and not necessarily written into the policy, but you can have those conversations with the underwriter. These are the things that are in place, and a narrative goes a long way with that. So just me as a broker calling up and saying, hey, we're going to have this stuff in place is not necessarily as good as this is a plan. This is a plan that we have in place. We've talked to these vendors. We feel like this is going to be a 30-day period to put MFA in. We feel like it's going to be another 60 days to do this. We've got a plan that's put together. And once that is in place, we want to be able to come back to you. And because this has been put in place, we would like to increase those limits to have a full-blown policy there and have that conversation. I mean, insurance and cyber insurance in general, I mean, you're a partnership. And
a lot of people don't see it that way, but I agree. I agree with you. It is a partnership because you are trying to have a third party accept some of the risk for your environment. And there's an exchange for that. You have to pay the insurance carrier some amount of money for them to take that risk on.
Exactly.
So
identifying that and putting together something that shows that you are putting the things in place goes a long way, not only just from an underwriting perspective, but just in a partnership perspective with a company that is really, at the end of the day, they're offering you a policy without certain things in place so that you can be covered.
Right.
And, a lot of times they'll work with you on that. So if you're able to put some things in place and you've had those upfront conversations during the policy term, you could go back to the carrier and say, hey, we've been able to implement these. Some carriers you won't have that option with, especially if you're larger companies that don't have basic controls in place. Ooh. The carrier may come back and say, we appreciate that. We think these are great things that you're doing. And at the next year's renewal,
we'll have that
conversation at that time. So it really is
so
specific.
Not a guarantee, right? Yeah, like you said, it's going to be insurance carrier specific.
Yes,
got it.
But definitely have that conversation and know that going into it.
Yes,
I think that's a fantastic question to ask your broker and to have a conversation with, if you're, for myself, with my clients. This is something that we can think about when we get this done. We've had that conversation. We can have that conversation with the underwriter to increase those limits.
Right, and maybe they put other controls in place to mitigate since they don't have as much coverage. That's a separate conversation as well. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there. As we shift to our next question, there are a lot of people out there that are wondering what happens when I have a claim. Suddenly I get 5 of my PCs out of 500 that say you've been locked up with ransomware. What are the steps that do I call my lawyer first? Do I call my insurance agent first? Do I call the help desk first? From your experience, I have my own personal experience, but from your experience, what's the first call that people tend to make?
The first call that people tend to make is to me as the broker, and all I do is cyber for our company. So that's kind of my niche.
Yeah.
And so I'll usually get the first phone call with that. That doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Within your policy that gets sent to you, there's usually a 1-800 number for claims calling in a hotline. There'll be somebody that'll answer the phone that'll take the information, and then at that point you'll wait for a call back from the adjuster. That's kind of the same situation that I would be in. I would put the claim in for you, but I would also give you that number, the hotline number, so that we're hitting it from both angles to make sure that is happening as quick as possible. Because this is the worst time of your life.
It's not fun.
And you are going to be upset. You're not going to know what to do. You're going to be in your head trying to think of the things that you can do to help maybe, and they might hurt.
Yes.
So really at that point, conversation with me would go along those lines. Here's the 1-800 number. Please call this in. We're going to be submitting this claim for you in the meantime, and then I'll have a little bit of a calm down moment and walk through. Okay, this is what to expect.
Yeah, because that's the problem. People don't know what to expect.
Exactly.
And if somebody's been lucky enough to never have a car accident or have a problem with their house where they're calling their agent, they don't know what happens after they make that phone call.
Mm-hmm. And a lot can happen between now and then. You may want to try to buy equipment. You may need to. You're in your head. You're getting ready to hire somebody that might not be covered.
Yes.
So what I normally
responder, the incident responder, you might go, oh my God, I'm going to call 1-800 Mandant or something like that. Yeah.
So really, what I try to do at that point is let everybody understand, let the clients understand that it's a calm down moment.
Okay.
This is it's not going to be as quick as you want it, but it's going to be done correctly. And within that, you're going to be getting a phone call back from the carrier. The carrier is going to get some information from you. They're going to ask, what you've done so far. Try to get just basic knowledge of kind of what's going on. At that point, they'll get you in touch with outside counsel.
Yeah.
Then outside counsel will be setting up a phone call with you, and there will be an engagement letter there so that you have somebody that does this every single day on the legal aspect of things. And
people are surprised by the legal aspect of it. There's a real good reason to get lawyers involved on multiple fronts. I know from firsthand experience when the company I was with before, our third-party vendor got popped, as they say, and the experience, they were breached in May of 2020. We were notified in July of 2020. Mm-hmm. And then we spent from the middle of July of 2020 until the end of October 2020 dealing with the fallout. And there was no ransomware that hit our network. None of our data was exposed. It was a surprising experience for me, and it was frustrating. And like you said, people get upset. It kind of like a punch in the stomach. Mm-hmm. It's a little easier of a punch if it wasn't your environment that got breached. I can say that much, but still you feel like you failed. Right. And
you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't been through this. Claims counsel, that's what they do. And they'll help walk you through to make sure that you stay in compliance with their state and federal laws that surround privacy and the information, PII, PHI.
The health information. Woo,
there's just
PHI.
steps that you need to make sure that are being followed there, and that'll help kind of guide you through the process, of where you need to really take this. Not only with that, but you're also going to have access to IT forensics as well, that you'll have panel providers that you can contract with on that as well, that'll help kind of figure out what it is that's going on, build basically a report so that they can have legal counsel look at that so that they understand what exactly, what information did
was
they
lost.
get to, was lost. What do we need to do now? What are our requirements that we need to abide by?
Right.
As well as data restoration. I mean, you can get into a situation to where even if you have a ransomware demand and you do pay the ransomware out with the crypto and now you've got a key, that you might not get all of the information back from that. So there's a data restoration cost that goes along with that within the cyber policy as well.
People think that cyber decryption key is magic. They think that I got the key, woohoo, everything's going to be decrypted in the next 2 hours. It's like, well, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes the decryption is not as fast. Sometimes it doesn't even work. And sometimes it's a 2-layer or 3-layer, as they're calling it now. First we're going to encrypt all your data, and we're going to extort you to get a key to decrypt it. And then we're going to exfiltrate your data, and then we're going to extort you to not disclose it. And that is not a fun experience to go through. And it's one of these things where a tabletop exercise is what we do for some of our customers. And we write custom tabletop exercises that say, what do you want to do? Do you want to just talk with the C-level folks to say, this is what's going to happen in a ransomware experience if you have it? Because like you said, people don't know what to expect. And if you've never gone through it, you don't know the steps. You don't know that, honestly, almost your first call after your call to your insurance agent is to your lawyers. Because in my experience, there were lawyers from the insurance company, and then there were lawyers from our organization, and those two lawyers had to agree on things before we moved forward, because there was a different feeling as far as who had to be notified. Did we have to notify everybody whose data was exfiltrated and then extorted, or did we only have to notify some of the people? So it was, there's a lot to go on in an actual ransomware event. And that's not the only event that cyber insurance covers, because you could have a business email compromise where someone sends a fake invoice, that invoice is paid. That can be covered under cyber insurance if you've got it written correctly.
That's correct. You can, and it can be covered under your crime as well policy. If you have a crime policy that covers for social engineering or invoice manipulation fraud as well. But there is some coverages on your cyber for that as well as business income loss is one that people don't really sometimes think about, and that's the insuring agreement right now that really is becoming the most difficult because of all the information that needs to be involved with that to be able to prove that business income.
What is your real business income? Right.
And you do have access to a panel provider on that as well, with a forensic accountant that will go in and help you do that.
Okay.
But putting that together, that number can be more than what the ransom was a lot of times. So it's a very robust policy from a cyber perspective, because there's so many different things that actually is covered within that policy. It doesn't need to just necessarily be looked at as this is a PHI, PII. This is just a personal PCI. This is just information policy to make sure that we're in compliance. We have to do notifications, or this is just a ransomware policy. Because there's so many things, so many insuring agreements that trigger in the case of an event. And to your point, when you were talking about, ransomware and the guidance that you get there are bad actors out there, and there's good bad actors and bad actors.
Yeah.
And if you're working with a panel provider that's dealing with them every day, they can help guide you and say, okay, these guys will pay the ransom and give you the key.
A legit key that works.
Legit key that works. These are the ones we don't have that experience with. Maybe we need to start focusing on what the data restoration would look like on this or that, and kind of figure it out from there. Yeah. As well as you're going to have negotiations involved in that as well. So you have negotiators within that.
That is very strange. When we went through the experience at my previous organization, hearing that there was somebody whose job it was to negotiate with the ransomware gang, and to find out that the ransomware gang is open to negotiation. if they're really good, they've done their homework on you and they know what your business income is on a monthly or yearly basis, and they know what they think you can afford. That being said, they still just want money.
Right. It's modern day bank robbery. You know, they're going straight to the source a little bit with it. They want the money grab, and they're using the data that you have as hostage to be able to get to it. So, they will normally negotiate, but you get in situations where they won't. You know, they know that they've got some
really good
data.
Yeah.
And if you get in a situation too where you decide, well, I'm just not going to pay it, well, they could post that now on the internet, and then you now have other
extortion
issues.
Now you've got extortion to deal with. Yeah. And that's a whole separate topic. Let's stick with our four. We're sticking with our four questions. So now let's move on to our third question. How does one improve your cybersecurity insurance coverage if you didn't have some of these controls in place? Is it simply just a matter of putting the controls in place and say, hey, I didn't have MFA on, now I'm going to put it on? Or are there other things that might help secure even more competitive pricing or open up the market to more of the carriers? Things like awareness and training campaigns. Does that really help? Does phishing tests actually help?
Yes. I mean, from a carrier perspective, they want to see, it's almost like a top down. If your C-level starts looking at this as a major risk and really looks at what are the things that we can do, it's going to have a trickle down effect.
Yes.
So the organization is going to be the same way. So if you're doing education, if you're doing phishing simulations, and within those phishing simulations, you're identifying the people that are continuously clicking on that, and you're focusing that education after the fact of saying, why? Because it's going to normally be the.
Let's have a little conversation
exactly.
as to why you keep clicking on these.
Or
links.
let's do some education. Or then if it keeps happening, maybe we need to have a more in-depth conversation of why this is happening and if this is the right fit for you.
Right.
So that definitely does go a long way with it, because you're going to find that the same people click it over and over and over.
They do.
From a simulation standpoint for those phishing simulations. Now, education is not the only thing. I mean, having a written breach response plan and an actionable that's been tested plan in the case that this does happen, which you can use your cyber policy as a part of.
And it can help you. Sometimes they give you a draft plan that you can then customize for your environment.
Mm-hmm. And it's really just knowing that you've got, okay, if this happens, these are the steps that we need to take. These are the people that can make the decision at 3:00 in the morning on a Saturday or whatever it would be.
You've pre-identified the people. Yes.
Exactly. Things like that go a long way, and it's evolving. So, just because the things that we've talked about now are the number one things that need to be in place doesn't mean that coming into next year's renewal, there's not going to be other things that we need to be looking at.
Agreed.
To help with that. So this is a coverage that's rapidly evolving. I mean, at the beginning of this year, MFA was the big thing.
It was.
And then now it's MFA, EDR, backup solutions. It's just going to continually evolve. And you're going to see a lot more companies that are really going to be looking, I think, almost to the insurance company now to set the guidelines for what's considered best practices. You and I just had a before we were on here, talked about how there's a difference between meeting compliance standards and meeting insurance carrier standards and what those look like. So we're seeing a real shift, I think, in just the overall IT environment, because you can tell everybody out there, these have been things that have been around for the last
MFA
8 years or whatever it would be. And these have been conversations that have probably been had with these organizations, but it's been looked at as an upsell or something that maybe doesn't need to be
too much friction.
Too much. Yeah, there's too much that goes along with it, where at the end of the day, people can evolve the same way that anything else can. Yes, first few days of implementing anything new is going to be a little bit difficult, and then everybody gets used to it. So a lot of the stuff that the carrier is looking at to be in place is not necessarily something that's above and beyond.
Correct.
It's really just baseline IT security.
It's stuff I've been preaching about literally for 10 years. I mean, I remember when MFA first came out for things like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and those other tools, Gmail. I can distinctly remember I had multi-factor authentication turned on my Gmail account. I was traveling abroad. I thought I was in a safe space. I was in a library. I opened up my little tablet. I went into Gmail, and somebody sniffed my credentials. I go into the meeting. 10 minutes later, I'm in this meeting having the conversation, and suddenly my phone goes off. It was an SMS push because they didn't have their app out at that point in time. And I was like, son of a gun, somebody sniffed my credentials. But if I hadn't had multi-factor turned on, this is 10 years ago,
Right.
they would have had my account. They would have had complete operational control of my account, which, and I preach this up one side and down the other. Multi-factor authentication, like you say, is not new. It's been around forever. And it is a relatively simple control to implement. And people shouldn't feel bad that, oh no, I'm being asked to do this. It's not that the people are failing per se. It's that the threats are increasing.
Exactly.
And the environment has changed, as you said. And sometimes the metaphor of a house is a good one. Who here, probably no one, goes to bed at night without locking their door on their house. Sometimes you might have an alarm system turned on, or you might have a motion activated, light to come on. Those are simple controls to act as deterrents. Because really what we're talking about are deterrent controls. There are other controls we can talk about later, but so we've got options for improving the competitiveness of your insurance coverage. One would be doing awareness and training, phishing tests, having a plan for incident response plan, which can be pretty straightforward. You can customize it. We have some templates that I'm working with to my customers. I gave them the basic template, and we're now enhancing it and customizing it for their environment. And then the other one, that a DR plan, disaster recovery plan, is a really good thing to have for folks. You don't know when a disaster is going to hit, so you want to make sure that you can recover from it, and that plan can continue to evolve as well.
Exactly.
And do you see that as the things that I just listed? Do you see those as not? I'm going to state it this way. Do you see them as ways to reduce the cost of your insurance?
I see those as ways to increase your coverage, because without those controls in place, you may be offered some insurance with the expectation that those controls will be put into place. And at that time, like we discussed before, you might be able to raise limits to that point. You're not really in an environment right now where an insurance company is looking at certain controls as, if you put this in place, I'm able to give you a discount.
Okay.
Because they are basic controls.
Yeah.
This is basic things that need to be put into place, and that's exactly how the insurance company is looking at it. These are the basic controls that we need to have in place to be able to offer coverage. That doesn't mean that having those controls in place doesn't mean that you're going to have more options out there. So I think there's a difference between looking at a premium reduction as opposed to a more competitive marketplace. So what you're doing basically by having some of these things is you're giving yourself a competitive advantage out there, so that the insurance companies want that risk. They think that it's a good risk that they can be on, and that's where you can help with the premium and pricing. So when you get to the point where you have all these controls in place, and now you've got more than one company that wants to really look at it, one or two companies that are looking at it. I mean, if you've got 14, 15, 20, whatever it would be, that are looking at this, you'll start to see more competitive pricing at that point.
And again, the price may not go down per se. It may be a matter of the coverages go up. I'm dealing with a client of mine right now who went to market for a renewal, and they had a $5 million policy coverage. So the policy was worth $5 million if an incident occurred. It was reduced to $3 million. The premium doubled, and the cyber ransomware limit went from $1 million down to $250,000. So, and a lot of that has to do with these controls not being in place, like you said. So I'm working with them to get these controls implemented, and it's a harder conversation than I thought I'd have with some of the people, but it's change. People don't like change. But you're right that it's a matter of making sure that you get these basics in place. It's not going to lower the cost, but it will make you more attractive. And in this case, the client put it out to 12 different insurance carriers. Only one nibbled. The rest of them said, no, thanks.
That's a very good way to put it, nibbled, because even though you might have one carrier interested, they still may only be wanting, they may basically look at this and say, okay, we will quote this, but here are some things that we're still going to need you to do,
right?
Even to be able to bind coverage. So it's just a very evolving world. I mean,
we could have this conversation in 6 more months.
Exactly. And it could be different things that we're discussing. But I think that the best way to look at it from an organizational standpoint is you're going to have to do these at some point. It's just whether or not you want to put a plan in place and know the ones that are kind of the big ticket, high priority items, and let's start going down that checklist. Let's get these things done, because if we're going to get in a situation in the next, could be sooner than later, where it's all going to fall on you and you're going to have to do everything all at once.
Right.
And that's going to be a huge money spend that you're going to have to do. Whereas if you've got a plan together and you can start kind of checking the boxes down and doing certain things over the next 3 years or whatever it would be, the plan that you put together that gets you up to that point, it's a lot easier to digest than, being in a situation where you may be forced just to be able to do business with certain companies that you have to have these certain things in place.
Yeah. And that leads us nicely into the last topic that we'll talk about in this particular webinar, is the question of what do you do if you can't afford it? And we've kind of talked about it in multiple different ways already, but it will be good for people to think about. And I can imagine a number of companies that are in this situation where they had cyber insurance before. Maybe it was part of their general business liability policy, maybe not.
Like an endorsement or
like
something.
An endorsement.
Along those lines. Yeah.
And now they don't get that. So, and they talk to their insurance broker, and the broker says, sorry, I can't get anybody that wants to give you cyber insurance. What are some of the things they can do if they're different than what we've already talked about?
Well, I think that we have to kind of go back a little bit to it. I mean, you're going to have to at some point make a business decision on the IT security that you have in place, even outside of insurance, because those are basic controls. Those are things that need to be in place, even if you're not purchasing the insurance, to be able to, you can self-insure that risk if you need to but those are very, very key. And that's where really my conversations always start. It's, what is the security that you have in place? Let's fill out an application. So you ask
that open-ended question to say, what do you have in place?
What do you have in place? Or I'll give them, what I've presented to you, a checklist of things that we want to see in place. These are the things. Let's identify the things that you don't have, and let's come at it from a consultative approach and say, all right, what are the things that we can check? What are the things we can't check? How is that going to impact us on the front end? Because I don't want to be in a situation where I just hand an application to a client and say, fill this out. And then I go to the insurance companies, and then they're looking at this application and they're saying, I don't want this.
They
don't have any of the controls in place. We're just not in an environment now where that underwriter or that carrier is going to come back and say, hey, yeah, we'd love to look at this. If you do this, and this. They're saying, I don't think so. I've got 8 to 10 other ones or more that are sitting right here that I'm going to focus on. I'm going to put that at the bottom of the pile or the trash can.
Yeah, right.
And you just don't want to do that. It's not a good thing for your client, for my clients, to be able to be in that position.
Because they feel rejected.
Exactly. And you're not putting them in a good spot, because even if you do some of the things after the fact, you've still initially put that thought process into the underwriter's mindset that they didn't have these, or we don't have a plan to put those in place.
Right.
So identifying those early and putting a narrative together on if we're not going to have those in place by the time we're looking to insure coverage, or exactly what we can do over the next little bit to be able to get us to where we need to be, is really the way that I focus on that. Because at the end of the day, those tools need to be there. And in order to get insurance and to get the insurance that's going to cover you correctly, we need to focus on this first. So let's do the things that we need to on the front end before we go out to the marketplace. And now the marketplace has a sour taste in their mouth because of the things that you've put out there in front of it.
Right.
So it's really my job and a broker's job to make those identifications and have those conversations on the front end. This is going to impact. These are the things that we need to look at. Can we tell, you have to do this, you have to do that? No, it's going to be a business decision from the organization. This is one of the biggest claims that we're seeing out there. It's nonstop. I mean, just on before our call here, I had two calls come in for new claims. I can see anywhere between 3 to 2 claims a week within the cyberspace. I mean, it is,
and almost all of those are ransomware related.
Some of them are. Yeah, okay. I mean, ransomware accounts for right now.
I mean, 2/3,
majority of them. Yeah, okay. I would say so. But there's still other
business
ways
email compromise.
Yes. Okay. But ransomware is kind of the hot topic right now.
Everybody's talking about it.
And so where was I on that? So
you were just saying that we were talking about the general concept of if you can't afford the insurance, and we were continuing to say you got to put the controls in place and having a narrative in advance. So a customer I'm working with, their renewal is October 1st, and we're trying to get some of these controls implemented. Mm-hmm. But in the backside, I'm also primarily working on a narrative that says, look, we may not get these controls in place by October 1st, but we have a plan to get these in place by December 1st.
Right.
And that will help that conversation along. And it also gives the organization time to implement these controls that they're viewing as disruptive, but aren't really disruptive, but are the new norm mm-hmm. for a good cyber insurance posture,
right,
given the threats that exist out there.
And you're really going to start seeing now contractual obligations that are going to require this as well.
Third-party risk.
Oh
my goodness.
There's so much that that's involved with cyber right now. I mean, it's the next big thing. I mean, I was talking about the amount of claims that are out there. I mean, and that's what you've got to kind of look at. You carry property insurance.
Right.
You carry these insurances for things that you are
business
hoping.
Liability insurance.
I hope that doesn't happen. I hope we don't have a storm. I hope we don't have a leak. I hope we don't have something that will come through. This is a coverage that there is an active bad actor out there every single day trying to make you use this.
Yes.
There's a difference.
That is a big
difference with that. And I think that's kind of how you have to look at it. And it's not how most people think of it either. There's not somebody in a hoodie that's sitting on their computer in a basement that's looking at your business and saying, I want to get in there. It's bad actors that are building programs, bots, whatever it would be, and they're just out there looking for anything that they can get into, any company that they can get into. And then once they're in, they're collecting data.
Yep.
And they're collecting that data, and then at a certain point,
they make a determination that it's time to launch. And mm-hmm. and it's interesting, the cyber ransomware business is literally a business model that has what they call initial access brokers, IABs, mm-hmm. who are doing nothing other than sending out phishing emails. So you might have had a phishing email exposure in, let's say, July 1st, and you're like, oh, John clicked on that link and John gave up his credentials, but nothing's happened in the last 12 days. Well, that's fine. Maybe not.
Well, it should be reported.
It definitely should be reported. And if you don't have an IT team that isn't immediately changing passwords, they should be. I was on a call. It was last week. It was Friday. And the potential customer said, yeah, there was somebody that clicked on a phishing link a month ago and nothing really happened and we didn't think too much about it. And then all of a sudden his machine started acting a little wonky. And I was like, have you changed all the passwords for this person's, on every account?
Right.
Because you don't know what the threat actor has done.
And have you notified the insurance company? Because if you're not notifying the insurance company of that, even if it doesn't go anywhere, the insurance company may not cover that.
Oh.
It's kind of, I think of it a little bit like workers' compensation. If you have an employee that cuts their finger and you say, I'll take you to the hospital, I'm going to take care of this, but you never notify the company about it. Well, what if that gets gangrene? And the next thing you know, it's infected and you've got to amputate. Well, you're in a different situation. And that's how cyber is as well.
Interesting.
It's better for you to notify the insurance company of an incident that could or could not arise to anything, and hopefully does not, for them to not know about it and it to rear its ugly head later on. And you can get into situations where if you're refilling out at renewal applications and you're saying, yeah, we had a little incident with phishing or this or that, and the insurance carrier doesn't know about it, they will non-renew you. They will not want that anymore because you're not letting them know that these things are happening.
So there's really a relationship there between you and either your broker or your insurance company about the cyber posture of your environment and making sure that, like you said, I would not have thought about reporting a compromised account other than reporting it to my internal IT team, whether it's a security team or just a team.
And it may not raise to that level, but letting the insurance carrier know is always the best option with that because it gives them the idea that it could be something so that they're prepared. Whereas
would they likely act on that?
Well, it depends. So they may say, okay, you have that call with counsel or with your adjuster, and they may say, okay, well, keep me informed on what your internal IT people find. If it gets to a situation where we need to be bringing some people in, let's do that. I mean, you have a deductible, and some things under the deductible, the insurance company may not get involved with on that if it's some small things, but they want to know about it.
That's a good point because I I don't think of that many people that would report a compromised account to their insurance carrier. And like you said, I know some insurance policies have incident response teams where they might want to start doing forensics to make sure, particularly if you have intellectual property or other assets that are on-prem and that compromised account had access to those. If I was the carrier, I'm kind of putting myself in their shoes now, I definitely would have wanted to know about that so that I could do some forensics to say, did somebody get into the VPN with these compromised credentials, and did they plant, malware where they're just waiting for something to happen and trigger? So that's definitely a good takeaway.
There's a lot of things with that because too, the application, a lot of times I think the clients don't understand the application becomes a part of the policy as well. So putting down
all your declarations,
all your declarations. If you're saying that you have MFA, you have these different things, and that becomes a part of the policy. So if you get in a situation where that was not truthful, and you have a breach, that can cause issues because you're not putting down on that paper exactly what is correct.
Right.
So the insurance carrier thinks that they're covering a risk that they don't have all the information on as well. And I've seen that to where. And that's really why you need really to involve IT into any of those discussions. Your CFO doesn't need to be completing an application for your cyber liability because they may think that they have all these things in place.
They won't know whether or not MFA is on those administrative accounts that have higher privileges, the privileged accounts.
So you want to involve somebody that can answer those questions because it does become a part of the policy. And I think that over the last few years, the marketplace has seen that. I think that there's been some applications that maybe they don't quite understand the question, or they think that they have something that's in place, or they've been told that it's being in place and they thought it was already done.
Right.
Things along those lines. And
not necessarily maliciously. I mean, I could definitely see a scenario where an IT team says, oh yeah, we've got MFA turned on and we've got it turned on for all of our, privileged accounts, whatever they are. And they think they have, but they haven't audited it because they weren't asked to audit privileged accounts before. And then lo and behold, something happens and that account gets compromised. And now because it's a privileged account, it's a much bigger exposure than it would have been otherwise.
Exactly.
And I have filled out those cyber insurance questionnaire forms for over a decade. And I knew the answers to all the questions. And I was always upfront with the CFO. And I said, look, we don't have this in place. We don't have this in place. If you give me money, I can put these controls in place. It never turned out that there was a motivation because the policy typically was not that expensive.
Right.
And
that's changed because of the claims. The claim environment is what's changed. I mean, to your point before, the bad actors that are out there, it's a $1 billion business. It's
multiple billions.
Billion. It's unbelievable. They have customer service.
They do.
That's out there. And these bad actors care about that. They want to be known in the marketplace as the people that pay the ransom, give you the key, and move on to the next one. And, you have some that aren't really that way, but the ones that are doing this as a business model, there's going to be a 1-800 number that you're going to call. There's somebody that's going to answer that phone and walk you through being able to buy Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, whatever it would be to pay that. And I think it's hard to wrap our heads around that sometimes if we're not just living in it every day. If you're not in IT or you're not just in cyber insurance the way that I am. These are things that when I was first learning about all this stuff years and years ago was, how in the world? Well, how do you have this? Well, it's companies that are out there that are helping you do Bitcoin. They don't necessarily know that this is for ransom or whatever it would be, or they very well could, but you still can't find them. You don't know who they are, and they're an intermediary.
Right.
And so there's a lot that goes along with it, and it's not just as cut and dry as normal insurance would be. Finding a property insurance, your GL, the things that you're filling out and doing those. Just to even to that point, the forms are all different.
Oh yeah,
they all have different language.
I've filled out 2 different forms in the last 3 months for 2 different customers to help them, and you're right, the language isn't the same. I knew what they were asking in both cases, but the language was not the same. So that if you don't have experience doing it, the CIO I'm working with now and the previous CIO, they both kind of threw up their hands and they're like, I don't know what they're asking here, John. I need your help, and that's why I'm here. And it's interesting that you probably have to know as much or a lot of IT and IT security that you wouldn't have expected to know otherwise. I've learned a lot more about insurance than I ever expected to learn. So, Joe, that was great. I appreciate your time. Today, you and I know that we could continue to talk for another hour.
Yes.
But we would probably bore Lance. He would probably be bored out of his mind listening to us talk about this. It's been a great topic. I appreciate your time. Thanks again for coming. Thank you all for watching. This is Inside the CISO's Office. I'm John Bruggeman and Joe Davis.